Coming up, with the New York Football Giants preparing for that Saturday night special against the Philadelphia Eagles, we flip it over to the offensive side for Big Blue and ask the questions. Can Daniel Jones provide a repeat performance? Does Saquon Barkley need to be next level great for Big Blue to win? And what are some of the myriad of issues that the Philadelphia Eagles defense could present this weekend? Yes, my friends, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your hosts. Over there, Andrew Makowitz. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. No time for pleasantries, as we are all eyes on the Philadelphia Eagles, Andy, and breaking down what should be a fantastic matchup on Saturday night.
I'm excited. I mean, we get the Eagles one more time. I know. I was gonna jump into song and dance. I thought that was probably a little inappropriate. When teams play for a third time, you'd think that the numbers are higher in terms of how many times that the team that's won twice would win. But it's obviously that age old saying. I think it's like they're 20 and 14, I think, or something like that, or 20, somewhere around there. I mean, I don't want to completely mumble the stats, but you'd think that the number would be higher. If you've beaten a team twice before, you're obviously a better team than them. What would the third time be? It's encouraging for the Giants saying, hey, we know you. We're comfortable with you. Let's just get to Saturday night and do this thing.
Yeah, there's some six seed stats as well that favor the Giants in the playoffs here in the second round, I believe. So we'll talk about those on Friday's show too. But to your point, man, like a lot of times I think, the difference there is, again, you're still on the winning side of it when you play a team for the third time and you've beaten them the first two times in terms of record. But you also get, like, if you're the team that's lost twice, well, you're the team that needs to make the bigger adjustment, take the bigger risk, right? So I think that often plays a factor where the Eagles in this case are saying, hey, if we keep doing what we've been doing, then we should be able to have success and win this game. Ironically, I wonder if that Week 18 game where it's all the backups for the Giants maybe gets the Eagles just saying, what should we be fine-tuning here? Because that was closer than we wanted it to be. Before we tackle the offensive side of the ball, just a quick note, because we talked about the defensive side. Yes, we're well aware that we mentioned the Jalen Hurts shoulder injury, said it was the off shoulder. No, it was the throwing shoulder. Ironically, Andy, when we were texting about it, someone in the comments were like, he went back into that game and threw for another 100+ yards and blah, blah, blah. And that's exactly what Andy said back. He goes, I forgot that it was the throwing shoulder because he looked so good when he got back into the game, an easy one to gloss over. But hey, for nothing, it's not accountable.
He had a higher completion percentage and passer rating in QBR after he got the shoulder injury. So when I thought about it, I'm like, oh, the shoulder wasn't injured throwing it. I thought it was his off shoulder. Clearly, it was his right shoulder. But I mean, let's be honest, it didn't seem to impact him all that much.
There we go. And by the way, it's something we're going to talk. We'll talk about here as we get closer to game day, because I think Giants fans in general are maybe building that up a little bit more in terms of expectations, which could be a dangerous proposition. 15-9, Andy got the full official numbers up there for the sweeping team coming out of the regular season series when they meet again in the playoffs. 629 win percentage, but 15-9, like you say. If you means you're undefeated in the regular season, losing 9 times is somewhat significant when it comes to that third matchup.
62% win percentage for teams that have swept the regular season seems smaller than you'd expect, because if you're winning those two games in the regular season, you would think that they are the better team. They would have an advantage, and obviously they'd be hosting the other team in a playoff game. So
yeah, that too. That's a road.
All of those things combined, 62%. I was expecting it to see 80% or 85% because you've already shown the ability to beat that team. So that's an encouraging stat for Giants. It's not 50-50, but 62%. I mean, I'm okay with that.
That's saying if we played this Saturday night playoff game 10 times, the Giants would win 4. You know what I mean? Like, if you want the season in totality, I think you'd say, yeah, that feels about right. So hopefully this is one of those 4 in that multiverse of madness. Before we dive in on the offensive side, we talked about the defense on the last episode. We talked about Wink Martindale and some of his adjustments. We had mentioned this, I think, going back to last week, but both he and Mike Kafka are getting some conversations, some interview requests. The Giants shut down Mike Kafka's opportunity to go interview, saying, like, we want everyone to be focused in on this game and that task. So he'll have to at least wait in order to maybe get into those head coaching interviews. But on Wink's side of it, when he was asked about it, he, I mean, he offered a perspective that should at least feel good for Giants fans if you want to have some continuity going forward beyond this year. Because Wink didn't seemingly feel like head coaching opportunities were on the table for him.
Yeah, when Wink Martindale got asked the question, he gave a very honest answer, and he started it with like, "No coach speak. I'm just going to tell you how I feel."
Right.
And he said, "I'm honored to receive some of these requests, but let's make something very, very clear." I'm paraphrasing here, but what he said was he never viewed getting the defensive coordinator position with the Giants as a stepping stone to get another head coaching position. He said it's always been a destination of mine. And he
Yeah.
also said, when I interviewed for this role, when ultimately Joe Judge got the role a few years back, I met the Mara family. They've stayed in touch. They became mentors for
Uh-huh.
me in my process. So he said it was natural for him to be able to feel comfortable coming back to New York. And his best quote is he said, "I love it here in New York. It's the greatest city in the world with the greatest fans in the world." And basically, everyone, when he was saying all this stuff, you're like, if you're a Giant fan, you're like lapping it up with the spoon. You're like, this could not be better. And then, of course, at the end, he's like, "But if I get offered a head coaching position, I'll have to weigh the good and the bad," which is like, do I want 5 times the amount of money and to run a team myself, or is the pasta at Carbone really that good in New York?
And ultimately, we'll see how the game goes on Saturday, right? Because that can go a long way to furthering the resume and maybe leading some opportunities, which, by the way, I always wish nothing but the best. And it's easy to do that when you feel really confident in Joe Shane and then obviously Brian Dable to continue to run the ship and bringing in new minds around this head coach. That being the case, though, we want to talk about the offensive side of the ball for the Giants and what they need to accomplish against the Philadelphia Eagles defense. And before we dive fully into it, I just want to rattle off some stats. And this isn't me being glass half empty. It's not me trying to bring down the wind in the sails from New York Giants fans. But just in terms of, we talked about it against the Vikings, how slight their point differential was. We know all the one possession games. We know, as we mentioned last episode, Jalen Hurts presents far different problems than Kirk Cousins does in totality. The Philadelphia Eagles, 28 points per game, surrendering just 20. They average 477 yards per game, give up just 344 on average to opponents. They have 59 first downs to 40 on average for their opponents. They outgain first downs by 60 over the course of this season. The rushing first downs is a big number here for them as well, where they have a massive 50 first down ratio over top of the opposition. The third down completion percentage, conversion percentage, I should say, is 45, almost 46% to 38 for the opposition. They convert 68%, almost 69% on fourth downs to 62 for their opposition. When you look through some of these key stats, it's just a friendly reminder. They also, penalty wise, we talk about 90 penalties to 95 for opposition. That's just the 90 is the real number here, talking about are they disciplined or not. 682 penalty yards for the year, an average per game of just 40 yards. So you're talking about maybe a couple of holding penalties, small fouls, not a lot of big downfield pass interference, not a lot of roughing the passer penalties to go in there as well. And their turnover ratio is a +8 with 23 fumbles, by the way, but just 10 lost. It's just to put a little bit of context to this game because we said it going into the Vikings game. Even if they had lost that, there'd be a ton to take away from this season. Here in this moment, I want the Giants to win. I believe that they can have a path to winning this game when it comes to the offensive side of the ball specifically. But the Eagles are a really good team, and I don't want Giants fans to get glossy-eyed over what felt like a team that was struggling down the stretch, etc. Still the number one seed, still won games, even without Jalen Hurts and Gardner Minshew at the helm. This is a really good football team and a far better defense than what the Giants saw a week ago against Minnesota.
Yeah, listen, I believe they were 13-1 before Jalen Hurts got hurt. They only lost one game, and it was to the Washington Commanders in a random division game. Things
Yep.
like that happen. Obviously, you saw how important Jalen Hurts was when Gardner Minshew came in. The team just didn't look like they were clicking on all cylinders. Obviously, lost to Dallas, was a little bit concerning. But when everyone's healthy on the Eagles, they are one of the top 3 teams in the NFL. And that is a tall order for the Giants to go up against them. I mean, we have to be realistic with how good this team is. I think we all feel really good and we're saying bring on the Philadelphia Eagles, but we should just remind everyone what that actually entails, which is a really good football team that plays complementary football, top 10 offense, top 10 defense, usually a recipe for success.
11 times this year they held their opponent to less than 20 points in a game. And then 3 other times it was 21 twice and 22 one of those other occasions, right? So we're talking about a team that, that's 3 scores effectively in 14 of their games this year. Like, these numbers matter. So when we turn our attention to Daniel Jones, let's start at the highest level here as we welcome in people over on the live there. Salazar, what is good, my friend? Can Daniel Jones repeat the same level of performance from a week ago against the Vikings? And I don't mean the exact number of yardage, rushing and passing, etc., but can he play that same type of impact game for Big Blue going into this one before we dive a layer deeper?
Wait, what? What are you talking about? Before we dive into what deeper? Hold on. I'm sorry. I am. I literally lost my train of thought. I was like, Adam, what are you talking about before we dive into what deeper?
I don't know what just happened there to Andrew Makowitz. We're going to get a medical professional in there to check on him. Can Daniel Jones have a repeat performance like he did a week ago against Minnesota? Before we talk about specific matchups that are involved in this, can you rely on Daniel Jones to be the leader of this team? Oh my God, I gotta.
So Adam, my Wi-Fi cut out on the first half of what you were saying, and you're like, before we get into the game, I'm like, before we get into what? I'm confused. I literally had no feedback and interaction, and you were just staring with a blank face, like, what is going on with Andy? Okay, now that we are back, we are good. Adam, I heard you this time. Thank you. In terms of Daniel Jones, obviously, it's going to be extremely difficult for Daniel Jones to be able to have this repeat performance. One, because the other team is kind of expecting that to happen. They're going to say, how do we take away Daniel Jones? We are not going to let him do what he did. Second is they have the personnel and the talent on the defensive side of the ball to be able to limit the Giants a little bit more than what happened against Minnesota. Remember, Minnesota is one of the bottom 3 or 4 teams in the entire NFL on the defensive side of the ball. There were miles and miles of space for Darius Slayton and Isaiah Hodgins and others to get open, which really just ripped that defense apart for the Giants to be able to do whatever they want, run or pass. Yeah. In addition, the pass rush of the Philadelphia Eagles is great. They have 2 amazing cornerbacks. It's a little bit of an issue for the Giants to be able to sit back and say, we want to dictate what's going to happen on their defensive side of the ball the way we did against Minnesota, when they just have far more talent than Minnesota does on that side of the ball.
Yeah, okay. So it's interesting when we talk about it, because a lot of people are saying this is the kind of game where if you're the Giants, it's going to be Saquon Barkley, who we'll get to here in a little bit. It's going to be the legs of Daniel Jones going to matter more. Try to pound this thing because of the very talented secondary that the Eagles have out there. So let's just start up front before we go into the layer deeper. You mentioned about, so it's interesting. I think that Hargrave is obviously in that middle of the defensive front for the Philadelphia Eagles. He's the guy that I'm most concerned about just across the front initially. Now, it doesn't mean that you look past a guy like Fletcher Cox, who's older, but is obviously still effective, or a guy like Linval Joseph, who Giants fans may remember from seasons ago with the New York Football Giants. 11 sacks on the outside edge from Sweat here as well to go along with his 17 assists. The front is dangerous. And I guess the question becomes to me here, how do you feel in terms of these matchups across the front for the New York Football Giants in front of Daniel Jones? Because that's phase number 1. Because I think we've seen samples of games where if Daniel Jones needs to get out and scramble, can he be effective? Yes. But his most effective use of his legs is when he's surveying, and the natural progression of the play leads to him using his legs to pick up a first down, to move the chains a little bit. If the Giants are under siege up front, that can be a real recipe for disaster. Are you worried about the interior and the center guard positions here? Or do we look on the outside where we have nothing but confidence in Andrew Thomas, but certainly a big test for Evan Neal, even a next level from that Vikings front?
The issue, Adam, is not necessarily where it's coming from, because the issue with Philadelphia is they have multiple players in multiple positions that can get to the quarterback. As an illustration, Adam, they have 4 different players that have double-digit sacks on the year. You mentioned Sweat, you mentioned Hargrave, you have Hassan Reddick, and you have Brandon Graham. All 4 of them have over 10 sacks. 3 of them have 11, and obviously Hassan Reddick has been a beast with 16 sacks on the season. That is a lot of bodies to account for and a lot of guys that can get to the quarterback. Conversely, for the Giants, when you look at it, the Giants' leading sack leader is our inside tackle, Dexter Lawrence, with 7.5 sacks on the season. Our three biggest sack leaders, which are Ojulari, Thibodeau, and Lawrence, almost equal the same of what Hassan Reddick is given. Those three combined have 17. Hassan Reddick by himself has 16. So the issue that the Giants face is not necessarily can they win the Andrew Thomas matchup. Like Philadelphia would say, okay, you want to take away one of our weapons. We have
Yeah.
three other double-digit guys that can get to Daniel Jones. Can Evan Neal step up in a big situation? Is Mark Lewinsky or Feliciano going to be able to handle pressure up the middle? Those are big questions that I don't know if we have the answers to yet for the Giants.
No, and it's a fair point because I guess that's where my concern kind of goes here because you mentioned it. There's two ways you think about it. Well, on the one hand, Andrew Thomas, okay, he's going to take a one-on-one matchup and we'll let that be, and then we'll attack other places. Or maybe they just keep rotating and switching things because they're also you have to look at the left guard position and wonder what's going to be the recipe for success there for the Giants because this is the difference, the stark contrast. We didn't talk about it as in depth, or we didn't need to because the Giants don't have any linebackers, but the linebacking core for the Philadelphia Eagles is as dangerous as the defensive front for the Philadelphia Eagles and as dangerous as the secondary for the Philadelphia Eagles. And this is where I really am concerned about the pressure that this front is going to be able to bring, the different ways that they're going to try to attack, and ultimately what it could mean in terms of the type of personnel the Giants have to run offensively, which could limit the ability to kind of, keep them off the line and give Daniel Jones some time.
Yeah, so that is exactly where I wanted to go with this. You read my mind. We're back at him. We're back in sync. I love it. I want more of it. The
You
thing that
recovered
I'm
from that
thinking
stroke
about
in record time. I'm really proud of you.
I know. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. The area that I think the Giants are going to have to exploit. So obviously we know with Darius Slay and James Bradbury, the wide receiver position is going to be a challenge. We are not going to win one-on-one matchups just on pure talent alone in those circumstances. Those two guys have the best coverage ratings in the league. 1 and 2, Slay and Bradbury right now. And when you think
Solid.
about the pass rush being able to get to them, part of it is they're so good there and they're so good at pass rushing that they complement each other very, very well. Because of this, you'd normally say, okay, the Giants have to run the football effectively with Saquon Barkley. And yes, they will need to do that. They will need to milk the clock. They will need to keep possession. But I actually think that there's two different matchups that are going to be more utilized by the Giants, and that is Richie James and Daniel Bellinger. It feels to me like that because of the pass rush, the Giants are going to have to get the ball out quickly. Now, if you bring Daniel Bellinger into the passing game, you bring Richie James into the passing game, into the middle of the field, it makes the Philadelphia Eagles have to think about who they're going to have to drop in coverage, who
Yep.
from that linebacking position can't get to the quarterback. And if they do rush the quarterback from that side, that's an easy pitch and catch for 5 yards for Daniel Jones. I see a lot of that happening in this game to really mitigate some of the pass rush pressure, knowing that the outside is going to be very difficult for us to throw against.
Yeah. So, and I first off, I agree with you. What Bellinger does in this game, Richie James, how they're able to pull those linebackers away from the line of scrimmage, hopefully. And it will really be interesting is what do the Philadelphia Eagles do defensively? Do they accept that they want it? Are they concerned about Daniel Bellinger? Are they concerned about Richie James? Or are they going to say, yeah, if our intention is to crowd that line of scrimmage and to bring pressure and run the risk reward of is it a run or is it a pass play, right? Well, we'll take that risk and we'll trust our safeties and our secondary to clean up some of that mess, especially early in this game. Because I think we talk about game script, the most important thing here is going to be what happens in those first couple of possessions. Remember, go back to the Minnesota game. Minnesota comes down, a seemingly very easy drive for a touchdown, but the Giants offense responds. Then they end up piling on and get out to that 17-7 lead. I find it a lot harder to look at this game and think the Giants are just going to be breaking off touchdown after touchdown. So you need to be balanced. But to your point, my concern around looking at how Bellinger and Richie James perform, which I think are going to be critical, is really, we talked about it last week. Okay, Isaiah Hodgins has been excellent since he's been brought into the Giants. He's been excellent going back to last week in the playoff game against the Vikings. But is he a true number one? No, we don't think that he is, right? Part of it has been getting the second matchup off of whoever has to take on Darius Slayton so you don't get beat deep, even if he's a 50-50 ball kind of guy. But I have a pit in my stomach, and it's going to be very fascinating to watch. This is kind of whatever you thought about Darius Slayton. He's a 5th round pick, wherever you think he's going to be in the future of this team. In this game on Saturday night, if he goes goose egg in this game, the Giants are going to be in a world of trouble. He needs to be able to, we said 4 or 5 catches a game, that 20-yard per catch average. he's going to need to give you a few of those in order to keep that pressure away from the line of scrimmage and open up some of that over middle stuff. I have a real concern, or I'm going to be very locked into what is Darius Slayton doing early in this game for those key moments, which really just means about when you get targeted, make sure you're securing that catch. We know what could have concluded that game for them last week against the Vikings with that drop. He did have some nice catches. That's my biggest concern is Slay and Bradbury, Hodgins and Slayton, and one of the two of them is going to have to win a high percentage of that matchup if the Giants are going to have success, because that's one-on-one coverage, no help needed, and that really makes problems for this defense or for the offense.
You mentioned something that's very interesting about winning one of those matchups. What that also does is it forces them to either drop back into zone sometimes or have to bring the safety over and double to make sure that something's happening over top. Every time that happens, it means either one less pass rusher or one less player in the middle of the field where guys like Richie James and Daniel Bellinger will operate. So I am with you. That's the dream scenario where the Giants win the game. Is the path is one of those players has to be able to win a matchup. Doesn't have to win it every time, but has to win it a handful of times to keep them honest on the outside, because you can't just say, we're going to go one-on-one on the outside and we can do anything else that we want in the middle of the field, because that's really where it becomes a disaster for the Giants.
And let's remember, too, just to round it out here, and then I want to ask you another question that connects back to the first wild card round for the Giants. 18-27 against Philadelphia in the 48-22 loss, 169 yards, 67% completion percentage, just 6.3 yards per pass, 1 touchdown, no picks, had a rushing touchdown, just 4 carries for 26 yards. When we look over the back end of the season for Daniel Jones, since what? If we go, there's the big 12-yard run rushes against Washington, that tie. But if you fast forward to even just 11-20 in November against Detroit, 7 rushes, 5, 6, 11, 6, 10, 6, 9, 10, 6. And then we know that's dialing back to the start of the season in reverse order. He ran the ball a bunch, slowed down a little bit for a couple of games. Like these 4 rush games for Daniel Jones down the back end of the season, where you're talking about 3 against Dallas, 4 against Philly, just 4 against Minnesota in the regular season loss. There's such a clear contrast here for this team to have success and Daniel Jones to be decisive and successful with his legs. And I think this goes part and parcel with, if the wide receivers are struggling to get open, the separation, which we've talked about throughout the year, the Giants do not have a great mark around the NFL. Daniel Jones' legs are going to be critical. And I just wonder if that pressure up front is going to make it hard for him to get into those spaces. And that's when I think we start to look at Saquon Barkley and compare back to the week prior and think about, 14 total touches, home run hits, baby, it's beautiful. I don't think it's going to look the same way for him. He's going to have to kind of have that, put it on my shoulders, and I'm going to be a bull at times and get those difficult yards.
Yeah, you mentioned Daniel Jones. He only had 4 rushes for 26 yards in the blowout loss that they had to the Eagles. He obviously
And
didn't
it's
play
different
in
too
week
because you get
18.
behind in those games, right? Script matters.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But, small sample size. They only ran him 4 times. That is not going to be a recipe for success for the Giants. If Daniel Jones runs it under 5 times in this game, I feel like we're in a very, very bad spot. He needs to be complementary with Saquon Barkley in the run game, because it does give them a different look. I loved the way that Kafka and Daboll schemed up how to get Saquon Barkley touches while not diminishing the run game. They used Daniel Jones effectively. Daniel Jones had significantly more rushing attempts than Saquon Barkley did. Combined, those two with a little bit of Breida, maybe one or two Brightwell touches, they still need to be able to run the ball effectively. It just may not look the same way that everyone thinks it should look, where, Derrick Henry gets the ball 37 times in a game. Daniel Jones is going to get at least 5 to 7 designed runs in this game, because if he doesn't, that means you're really taxing Saquon Barkley and you're really making Daniel Jones throw against that secondary.
Yes. Do you think then, one, we saw Breida get more reps in last week's game, but not necessarily touches. He had that one critical one where he broke 3 tackles and fell forward and got that yard you needed. Do you think 2 things? One, do you think that some of these jet sweeps that they were running, some of these, decoy kind of plays will actually be plays, not decoys, where you try to maybe, mitigate some of the pressure that this defensive front can bring by allowing them to get sucked into Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley and say, hey, Breida, you're going to need to have a couple of big runs, maybe a couple of big receptions. And then I'll follow up with a secondary question that ties back to a low-level wide receiver potentially for the Giants.
Yeah, I mean, there could be. I don't want to take Saquon Barkley off the field, though. I mean,
No, no, no,
we're
no.
in the
This is the double sets. This is
right.
obviously
I
the
was gonna
double
say
sets.
like
Yeah.
Saquon Barkley has to be on the field as much as humanly possible because
Yes.
even just him being on the field creates a threat that they need to either have a linebacker spying him or they got to bring in a nickel package, whatever it is to address that. When you bring in Breida, then you're basically saying we got to take one of our wide receivers off the field. And then, is Darius Slayton off the field? Are we not having someone in the slot with Richie James? Is Isaiah Hodgins off the field, even though he's been our best? Like it's a tough situation. I still think that Breida's a complementary piece where maybe he gets those one or two, maybe a handful of touches and tries to make the most of them because that seems to be what's been successful for this offense when they do get it going.
Do you think that Lawrence Cager, who last week was in there for some early reps, obviously struggled, dropped that pass right there down at the goal line that could have been a needle mover? Do you think that that puts him officially in the doghouse here for Brian Dable, or do they try to come back to it? Because I can look at him and say, when we think about trying to stretch that middle of the field and get the linebackers away, he obviously presents a little bit more speed and athleticism than a Daniel Bellinger does. And maybe is the guy you want to tap into here, even if it's, again, the decoy, Matt Breida, fast player, shifty player. Same thing for Lawrence Cager. It's hard to put a lot of expectations on a guy like that, but I think something unique has to happen in this game here offensively for the Giants. You have to look into a surprising place for a performance you're not expecting.
Yeah, it could be Cager. I think that's a good idea. I mean, he's similar to what I'm talking about with Bellinger and Richie James, where he's gonna get over the middle, he's gonna get looks. If the pass rush comes in, he's gonna be able to try to have the middle of the field to his advantage. Is a little bit more athletic, can make plays after the catch. I wouldn't be surprised to see him, but at the same time, I like the leveraging the guys that have gotten us there, just
Yeah.
putting them in the best positions for success. Ever since Bellinger became a New York Giant, I felt like he is a guy that really makes the offense look much, much more complimentary when they run the football as well. Obviously, you saw his capability scoring that touchdown against the Vikings. I like him in this situation. I really do think that I want to stick with the players that kind of got us there with the scheme that best utilizes this defensive matchup. That's just me.
Last two things before we get out the door. One, I want to ask you about the third down percentage on both sides of the ball here, which could be key in this matchup. But I'll also throw in Kenny Galladay. And the reason why I'll mention his name here is not about whether he catches touchdown passes or not. It really comes down to that one play. Everyone was joyous about it, the block. Because if you're talking about a game like this with the front that the Eagles have and the linebacking core that they have, it may become more critical in certain wide receiver sets to say, yeah, we need to spread this field out to try to get a little more space for ourselves to operate. And we also need bodies that can effectively go out and put on some blocks. If we're going to run some of those sweeps to the edge, try to get Saquon Barkley out into space. We saw some of those little dump off passes, let him work on the edges, right? And that may be as much of a reason not to see a lot of Cager in this game as anything. It's you need guys. Again, I hate to be as minimal or micro as this. When you throw a swing pass to the outside to Saquon Barkley, it needs to go for 7, not 3, right? Like the difference between 2nd and 7 versus 2nd and 3 or 4 is such a critical kind of area for the Giants here, especially early in the game. Be ahead of the down and distance, move the chains. It's not always about scoring drives, but about changing the field position. Like it does feel very nuts and bolts in this game, but it's like there's no margin for error for the Giants, especially when those opportunities for a big play come. You need to capitalize on it.
I couldn't agree more. And that's the big issue is the Giants are playing in a very, very thin margin like they have all season. They cannot turn the ball over. You saw 0 turnovers, clean game against the Minnesota Vikings. Daniel Jones playing great, and you're able to go on the road and win a game. They're going to need some heroics. Maybe it's not Daniel Jones taking everything on his back. Maybe it's not Saquon Barkley scoring 2 touchdowns, but those guys are going to have to be key contributors, and we got to make sure to win the turnover battle at the very least.
I'm going to be optimistic as I can, and I also am going to be terrified if there's any type of tackling behind the line of scrimmage on Saquon Barkley from the Eagles, because that is a big recipe for disaster if you have those 2nd and longs. Last thing, real quick here. Unless you want to save it for next episode, should we tease them with these third down percentages when it comes to Daniel Jones and what the Philadelphia Eagles do?
Yeah, I think very, very quickly, obviously, third down is going to be important. The Giants have struggled a little bit on third down, surprisingly. It feels like Daniel Jones has made some of the big key plays, but the Giants, over the course of the year, have had longer third downs than most of the other teams in the league. The Giants are 22nd in the league in third down conversion percentage at 37%. But with Philadelphia being top 5 in many different categories, especially in the air. One of the places where they haven't necessarily been as dominant is third down percentage on defense. They're 38%. They're right around what the Giants convert. They're 13th in the league. That's going to be a key area for the Giants on obviously the offensive side of the ball. It's going to be even more on the defensive side of the ball, which we'll get into tomorrow, where the Eagles are top 5 in third down conversion percentage because they have the ability to run and pass in some of those short yardage situations.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that Daniel Jones, when he runs, does a pretty good job of converting on third down. So really high percentage that he has when he's used his legs in those instances. So again, there's a lot of chess match kind of things going on here. At the end of the day, we know that coming up tomorrow, we'll talk about Andy's bet of the week. I've already put in a parlay on this game that I'll break down for everybody. And then a few more key matchups. What is the head-to-head? Does Daniel Jones need to outperform Jalen Hurts to have the win? Does it need to be a Saquon Barkley all-pro type performance where we're looking back and seeing that he had 150 plus all-purpose yards from the line of scrimmage? Or is it Mr. Fundamentals for this team and just trying to grind Philadelphia down into a battle that the Giants feel like they can win late? We'll talk about all that and more on our final episode of the week tomorrow. Until then, though, you get over to YouTube. Thank you for everybody who came in on the live. Continue to check in over there for that. The podcast feed is up and running as well. And until next time, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay during these New York Football Giants playoffs, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.